It is Monday, January 8th, 2018. My name is Ashton Ellett, here with Mr. Charlie Harman for another installment of the Two-Party Georgia Oral History Project, sponsored by the Richard B. Russell Library at the University of Georgia. Mr. Harman, has served as Chief of Staff for 3 United States Senators, Sam Nunn, Zell Miller, and Saxby Chambliss. He's also a past president of the Georgia Chamber of Commerce, Vice President for Blue Cross Blue Shield of Georgia, and a Vice President for Government and Community Affairs at Emory University in Atlanta. He also sits on the board of the Zell Miller Institute of Politics, or for Politics and Public Policy, as well as the Richard B. Russell Foundation, which is, of course, near and dear to my own heart. Currently a partner at Com360, one of Georgia's leading public affairs and communications firms. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us today. I wonder if we could begin just by telling us a little bit about your childhood and upbringing. Where'd you grow up?
Sure. And before that, just for a factoid check, I talked with Brian Miller, and I resigned my Zell Miller affiliation because of just where I am in my career. And I did serve for about 8 months. And also because I took on responsibility of being on the board of the Georgia Independent Colleges Association.
Okay. So a founding board member.
A founding board member, yes.
Okay. Well, thank you for clarifying that.
But I'm no longer on that board.
Okay.
I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, born in 1949, and as we were talking about, my dad's clear memory and frustration with the county unit system in Georgia, but my first political memory is, I guess it was the 54 or 56, I'm not sure which one, to be safe, 56, presidential nominating conventions with Huntley and Brinkley being the anchors. And being frustrated, and I was 5 or 7 years old, being frustrated that they were replacing Mickey Mouse, the Mickey Mouse Club. So maybe I should have remembered something because I became fully immersed in politics. But that's my first memory. My mother alleges that she took me in '52 to see Adlai Stevenson land and campaign for the presidency.
Okay.
But that's legend.
So you grew up in a Democratic family?
Well, it's hard to say. I think they were probably Democrats at a time, but they clearly, as you know, probably supported or voted for Eisenhower. But nothing. They were not active beyond voting. They were never engaged in political meetings or contributions or anything like that, but they did vote.
What do you remember about growing up in Atlanta, or Atlanta as sort of a political city? As you mentioned, your parents nominally Democrats, but probably supported Eisenhower, which would have made them relatively mainstream Atlantans back in the 1950s, whereas the Republican Party was obviously different than the Republican Party later became.
What, I'm sorry.
Sure. What do you remember about Atlanta politics growing up as a kid?
I think one is you think of Mayor Hartsfield, and I don't know when he was first elected, but he was mayor in the 50s, and his imprint of the airport, and also with some humor. But also, it was a big deal for Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts, and I'm sure Girl Scouts. Somebody, maybe I'm the first one to tell you about the gorilla named Willie B. Is that news?
This is
okay. Well,
to this native Illinoisan, this is new.
In addition to the Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, Mayor Hartsfield, up until I think the gorilla lived for some time. There was a gorilla at the zoo called Willie B, named after William B. Hartsfield. But in high school, clearly remember Mayor Ivan Allen and his role in trying to keep the peace in terms of the riots in Atlanta in the 60s, and his iconic getting up on top of the car with a
down in
bullhorn
the Spring Hill
and urging people to peacefully demonstrate and, if necessary, disperse if violence were to begin. So I remember that. Also, growing up in Atlanta, I remember. I don't think I connected the Supreme Court, but I remember the conversation and the actions about Brown v. Board of Education and how Atlanta reacted throughout, from the decision in '54 through high school. I graduated in 1967, so that was a big part of the political, legal environment that I grew up in. So those were early days, and I remember, and then in terms of Atlanta, much like today, always striving, proud then of its heritage, and proud now of its heritage with Martin Luther King, and again, particularly Ivan Allen and the airport.
Which high school did you graduate
I grew up
from?
in what's known as the Buckhead area.
Yeah. Okay.
I went to Dykes High School, D-Y-K-E-S, very near what's known as Chastain Park. Other graduates of that high school happened to be Johnny Isaacson and Billy Payne, and others. But those two come to mind in terms of Georgia politics and civic leadership.
And you went from...
Oh, then I graduated in '67 from the public high school, Dykes High School, and came to Georgia, graduated in 1971 with a degree in business. And I remember in my junior year, it seems, becoming, which would have been 1970, 69 and 70, I remember beginning to really think about politics and met a gentleman who was a senior government affairs representative for Coca-Cola named Earl Leonard, and you may have heard of his name. And in May of 1970, and expressed to him, my college sweetheart, now my wife of some 45 years, that I wanted to work in Washington. And Earl Leonard, which gets us to where you want to go, recommended to Charles Campbell, whom you've met, and at the time was administrative assistant to Senator Russell, that they, quote, put me on an elevator. And so my politics begins with Richard Russell in the summer of 1970 as what they call a patronage program, internship with Senator Russell, and I ran an elevator, later promoted to being a doorkeeper in the Senate.
The sort of the Buddy Darden track.
Except I think Buddy stayed a year or two. He was I think a 4-H intern, and that was a different group of folks. We worked with them, knew them, played softball with them, but that was a longer period. My period was 6 weeks.
Okay, so you were actually up in Washington during the 1970 gubernatorial campaign and everything.
Mid-July to Labor Day of 1970, I was in Senator Russell's office.
So that's how the politics bug
really bit me. They used to say Potomac fever,
right?
And I got it 100%, and I'm convinced that other than that moment in time and learning what I learned, that having Russell, that internship on my resume, probably separated me from the stack of resumes that Senator Nunn looked at in December of 1979, and I started with Nunn February the 1st of 1980. So that internship really set my career.
Okay, so couple questions. First, what was it about running the elevators and holding the doors that was so enthralling that made you fall in love? What did you see and experience?
Well, the staff, as we alluded to before we went on the air, working with the staff was just and being in that environment, even today, gives me goosebumps. Watching this staff of 9 people, extremely talented, dedicated to Senator Russell, dedicated to the Senate and to Georgia, doing what they did, whether it was the policy people or whether it was the staff who, the caseworkers, if you've heard of that term, that focused on making sure that if a constituent called or wrote Senator Russell's office, that the response was quality and was responsive and it was timely, and that impressed me. That this great man, who had been in the Senate since 1933, at the time he was maybe chairman of Appropriations. I'll defer to you, but was clearly chairman of Armed Services.
Sure.
And was maybe even president pro tempore of the Senate. That this great man, who's later the building was named after him, still had a dedication to Georgians from the rural parts to Atlanta to everywhere.
So what did you do when you came back? Did you come back to Georgia, or did you stay up in Washington?
Came back to Athens.
To graduate.
That fall of 70, graduated in spring of 71. Went to work. We got married, went to work for a bank, a savings and loan in Atlanta, and but kept my eye. In fact, back then, you could have the congressional record mailed to you from your senator, and it came out under his frank. And so I actually, for a number of at least weeks, subscribed to and received the congressional record.
So sort of following in Russell's footsteps.
Yeah. Well, not reading.
He didn't read
every word, every page, but that kind of, I kept my hand in it. Clearly followed the news, and began to really follow politics, and so I was enthralled with the environment, with the people, with the leaders, and I must say, the softball games. Going out on the mall and you're playing in right field because you're not very good athletically, and to your right is the Capitol and the dome of the Capitol, and to your left is the Washington Monument on a warm summer evening. Not much better than that.
and those, although there's some talk of doing away
with the game, that's right. But I'll let someone.
I'll believe
else.
it when I see it.
I got involved recently. There's a coffee shop. I don't know if anyone else has told you about it, called Cups in the Russell Building, and they were going to close and offer it out to some big national vendor. And I contacted some of my Chambliss staff, and we entered into the effort to save it, and that effort was successful.
Well, good.
So, but
hopefully the baseball, soccer,
but that the social opportunity of networking is not to be to just dismissed. That was a big important part of it. I remember one Saturday working in an elevator in the Russell Building. I even could tell you which one, but back then the elevators in the Russell Building were manually operated. Okay, so there was like this cage, and you opened the cage, and you opened the door, and senators and constituents and visitors to the Russell. Then it was known as the old Senate Office Building. Would enter your elevator, and then you would try to the only skill requirement, there were two. Recognize when a senator was buzzing, and 2, try to get as even to the floor as you could. And but what's this all about? I mentioned meeting people, developing a friendship with a Democrat who was under Humphrey's patronage, and excuse me, Mondale or Humphrey. We'll have to check the facts on that.
One of those Minnesotans.
He was from Minnesota, and he was, I was a part of the Democratic Party under Russell, and he and his patronage, and again, we can check on who the senator was a member of the Democratic Farm Labor Committee Party, and I just didn't know what that was. Labor.
DFL.
And being from Atlanta, farm. So I learned a lot that summer about politics across the country and about people.
So when you were working, you said you kept your eye on Washington. You kept connected with everybody that you were meeting. What was sort of your political activity? What were you working in campaigns?
I didn't do volunteer work. Zero in terms of until October of 1978, and I remember I voted for Nunn in '72, and I remember actually, this sounds crazy, but discussing with my wife, Georgia, Fletcher Thompson's a serious candidate. In '72, Nixon is running for re-election. Is it time to align Georgia's politics with its, national voting record? My parents, maybe they voted for Eisenhower, but they clearly voted for Russell and Talmadge because that's all you could vote for. And so I remember in '72, the spring of that year, saying, well, I think I'm going to vote for this fella Nunn because I'm impressed with him in the primary. And then in fall of '72, saying to her, well, thinking about Nixon, thinking about Fletcher Thompson, but deciding that it was still important for Georgia's brand of Democratic Party candidates to remain representing Georgia, and I voted for Nunn in the fall of '72.
So what is it? You said you were impressed with Nunn, and you mentioned the primary. David Gambrell, who had replaced your old boss, Richard Russell. Ernest Vandiver was in that primary, as was state representative. I think he was state representative in '72. What was it about Sam Nunn that impressed you?
Well, this is we're just going to laugh out loud. But the thing that caught my attention, because he was one of 13 candidates, was his jingle. Sam Nunn is young, Sam Nunn is tough. Put Sam Nunn in Washington. And particularly in light of the fact that I ended up being his administrative assistant / chief of staff. But that woke me up. And because Vandiver, in fact, when he was lieutenant governor, he and his wife Betty and my parents were friends. They lived in the same apartment complex. So I was probably a Vandiver guy. If precedent in history and familial friendships, but I just was struck by that, and then I started following him, and then reading what he said about issues made sense to me. So, but it was the jingle.
Well, 45 years later, you remember it. So
that's right.
It must have worked.
That's right.
Obviously,
that's
I wouldn't discount the power of a good ad.
Yeah.
So you actually worked for Senator Nunn's re-election campaign.
Well, I only voted for him.
Just voted.
So I was working for this savings and loan. I was really out of politics in terms of hobby or door to door or going down and licking envelopes. Just followed it because of my Russell experience. And then in October of '78, he was up for re-election. And again, I had been impressed with him, and I said, and I talked to some people, and I said, I'm going to send him a resume. And so in October,
just a cold,
cold. I think, in fact, I was so inexperienced. I was 78. I was whatever I was, 29. It was a handwritten resume. And on a yellow legal pad, I remember that.
He's got guts. How about that?
And I sent it in October of '78. He was reelected, and then I was a little persistent. I don't think overly persistent, but I was his state director, a guy named Joe Brannon, responded, and we spent 79, off and on. Fortunately, I had a good job as a junior executive in this savings and loan in Atlanta, making mortgage loans, and so 79 was back and forth, random catch-ups. Yeah, we're still on our, still on my stack of resumes. Thanks for calling me. I'll get back to you. Don't, And then in sometime around October, November of 79, they called me up and said, well, we got an opening. And I started out what's known as a field representative in North Georgia, and that was a person who did constituent service work, which I remember from my Russell days. But Talmadge, about the time that I was hired by Nunn, also had one field rep, and that ultimately became a guy named Henry Turner, who you may have heard of, and he now is executive with Altria. So he was kind of Talmadge's guy, and I remember being introduced to people in the early 1980 after being hired by Nunn as, oh, he's the Henry Turner of Nunn's office. And so started, and then I also drove to meetings, took notes, sent in a weekly report of what was going on in North Georgia to the then chief of staff, a gentleman named Richard Ray, who then compiled and who later became a congressman. And so that was my first job with Nunn in February of 80, and then the rest is history.
So when did you actually move up to Washington? Didn't
move to Washington, good question, until summer or early fall of 1982, because I had left. Our daughter came along, and I had left, and but people on Nunn's staff seemed to remember me, and they recommended to Nunn that they bring me on to begin to get ready for his '84 campaign, which, and this is a fascinating part of his history. Of course, like then or 50 years before him, 200 years before him, and then to this day, the thoughtful candidate or the incumbent starts realizing he's up for re-election, starts getting organized and preparing, as they all do. And so I was hired, and I went up to Washington in sometime, it seems, late '82, and worked as a projects constituent service person. And then, so we moved to Washington, and we moved back, and I was involved in his '84 campaign. And then continued with it.
Sure. What was it like to go from constituent services, sort of the office work, to campaign field work? Was that a shock?
Well, it wasn't, because it was still, and this may sound strange, but something that was true either in the banking business or with Nunn or later senators, and learned about it first with Russell, was constituent service. And so whether you're back then with Nunn, which maybe is an anomaly, there wasn't a lot of metrics and so forth. And this is again of interest to your students and to you. It was a lot about working with a 3x5 index filing box of what we call key coordinators or chairmen of counties. And so it was very low tech. The technology was these 3x5 cards and a notebook of a given county with the co-chairs, and then the people who had either supported financially or had been involved in putting on a pancake breakfast. And that was your core supporter team. And so that I had that from, let's see, 84. So I had that from 78, and which had had been handed down from '72, and so reconnecting with those people in the '83, '84 timeframe.
Yeah, I'm thinking back on it, and other than Fletcher Thompson in '72, I'm struggling to think of any real competition that Senator Nunn faced.
In '78, he had a race.
Okay.
He was a former U.S. attorney.
Okay.
You and I can Google and find out who that was. But that was a race, and it was a race, a campaign, because Nunn had a record by then. Carter was...
'78 was not a good year for Democrats.
His congressional midterm, congressional race, and there'd been some tough issues that you have either written about, studied, or heard about. The Panama Canal.
Yeah.
And so it was a tough race, but Nunn, he did not have, I don't think he had Democratic primary opposition, and he was victorious that fall against this then U.S. attorney or former U.S. attorney. And then so by '84, before you begin to think that I was in any way as talented as Bobby Kahn, in '84, I think our end-up general election opponent, no primary, was an unemployed substitute school teacher. and so that was 1984. But having said that, he traveled hard. We did engage in raising funds. Nothing like what you have to do today.
No.
He was ultimately successful, but by then he was not. While he was a senior member of the Armed Services Committee and the it was Government Operations Committee, Government Affairs Committee. He was not at the time a ranking member or a chairman in '84, but he was clearly identified in terms of the under Stennis, clearly identified as becoming a recognized leader, a thought leader in national security by '84.
So you become chief of staff in 1987.
Correct, November of '87.
November of '87. So what was it like to go from constituent services campaign? Did you ever work? Were you part of the policy shop before you were chief of staff?
I didn't.
Or?
When by the time I came back after the campaign, and my title was executive assistant. This is winter of spring '85. My wife and I moved back to Washington with our daughter, and I was the title then was executive assistant, and still was projects and constituent service, and working with our state office and grants and constituent service in D.C. and but was not on the political side. The policy side. Misspoke. And then in November '87, he appointed me. Then they called him administrative assistant, but chief of staff in today's wording. And but fortunately, when I got that job, we had and again, this goes back to being so impressed with the staff Russell had. Nunn had assembled an excellent policy staff, certainly on the Armed Services Committee. And by then, when I was in that fall of '87, he may have been by then ranking member on Armed Services, and was ranking member on the what's known under the Government Affairs Committee, the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, and he used that as a real building block of his career. But by then, he had a extraordinary staff of national security staff for the committee, had this Permanent Subcommittee investigation staff, and then so the personal office dealt with issues, all other issues.
Okay.
So like economic issues of specific interest to Georgia, agriculture, was handled by the personal staff. I had an extraordinary legislative director at the time, and then the press secretary was also very talented. In fact, you may have come across some of his work. He was working on his PhD here in Athens. He's now passed on. Ed Nagy, Nagy.
The last name sounds familiar.
He was. This was about the time of Fite writing the Russell biography, and Ed was studying, and his doctoral thesis was on Russell.
Okay.
So there was that connection.
Probably sitting over there in LeConte Hall.
Yeah, yeah. And but he was Nunn's press secretary. Julie Abbott was Nunn's legislative director. I remember to this day, she was a Morehead scholar she grew up in Louisville, Georgia, Morehead scholar at UNC. So bright, thoughtful woman. And Press Secretary Ed Nagy, and they had assembled a tremendous staff, which I inherited.
How much coordination or collaboration did you have with Senator Fowler?
Right. Well,
or I guess
he was
Mattingly
elected
before that.
Well, Mattingly was elected. I came on board and witnessed Talmadge's campaign in '80 with Senator Miller, or then Lieutenant Governor Miller.
Right.
Norman Underwood, who we know from our work together with the Russell Trustees Foundation. They were part of that race. I watched that, observed that, and Nunn, interestingly, Norman, as you may know, was a very integral part of this Nunn 72 campaign. But Nunn, and I don't know what he and Norman talked about, they remain close friends to this day, but Nunn supported Talmadge in '80. So with Mattingly coming on board, I was in Georgia in the early days, '80, '81, but I remember working with his staff. A woman she was, I think, Deputy Administrative Assistant Woody. Can't think of her last name now, but I remember working with her on issues of mutual interest to Nunn and Mattingly and to Georgia.
Okay.
And then Fowler, I remember working closely with his chief of staff, or at AA, and then a gentleman named Bob Redding, who had been a Nunn intern, and he was Charlie Hatcher, a congressman, his administrative assistant, and then he went over and did ag work for Senator Fowler, because Fowler was on the Senate Ag Committee.
Okay.
And so we worked very closely with Fowler, and through that, interestingly enough, and through my time with Nunn, again, Washington, and particularly the Senate, is a very small town, became familiar with Benson's staff, with Mitchell's staff.
And that's George Mitchell?
George Mitchell, who became minority leader, majority leader. And back in those times, Reagan was president, and the Senate went back and forth.
Right.
In terms of, so Nunn would be chairman, he'd be ranking member, then he would be chairman again. And so the Senate went back and forth in the Reagan years. And then I particularly well remember, so fall of '87, Reagan's still president, but I remember the Bush, and I remember particularly also, of course, we alluded to Bobby Kahn, remember well the convention here in Georgia in '88, and Nunn's involvement in that convention, Clinton's, at the time, not well-received speech.
the long and meandering
speech, the Tsongas, Benson,
yep.
Not Tsongas,
Dukakis
campaign, and interestingly, this is not about Georgia's transition, but maybe it is, was involved in '80, a little bit in '85 and '86, but particularly '87 and '88 with the DLC, the Democratic Leadership Council.
The sort of the centrist third
the
way.
centrist group,
yep.
And very involved in that for Nunn.
The now defunct DLC.
That's right.
things change.
That's right. And this is a footnote, and we may want to come back and revisit this. Given who Nunn was, and by the way, there's a great book, and I know you read over more than you want to care about reading. It's called "The Best President the Nation Never Had" by my friend, associate, and colleague Roland McElroy, and it's on Amazon. It's Mercer University Press. Roland was began with Nunn. In fact, I call him Peter. He began with Nunn from the start in '72, goals for Georgia in '71, and the book is called "The Best President the Nation Never Had," which is what George Will said about Nunn once. And Roland and I remain close today. In fact, again, if you want to circle this, if you go to Amazon and you look up the book, I think I'm the second. Julie Abbott is the first commenter, but I'm the second one, and I go under the pseudonym Amazon Reader. But it's in it. Anyway, I worked hard on that comment about Roland's book.
I've never heard.
It just came out in October.
Okay, well, I feel better now.
There was a signing party here, and then he and President Carter and someone else. Carter's written a recent book, and he and President Carter, Roland and President Carter, were at a signing book thing in Atlanta recently. But it's Mercer University Press.
Well, it's sort of an aside, but I guess my first recollection of Senator Nunn, I remember him not running for re-election in '96 because my home state senator, Paul Simon, was not running for re-election. That's when Dick Durbin went up to the Senate. But with the Obama campaign back in '08, there was the constant discussion that Senator Nunn might come out of retirement to run as Senator Obama's vice president.
Right.
But I guess he was he was not old when he left the Senate in '96 by any means.
And this is one we'll want, because I want to make sure I get this right, because I'm giving you some insight into Nunn that may not be in history books yet or written about. He did retire in '96 after and this is something about Nunn, he never fired from the hip. He always analyzed it up and down and sideways. But I think that he had been there. He'd served 24 years. And he, at the time, colleagues of his were people like Strom Thurmond and others. And I think that he had felt like he had served in the Senate, and he wanted to have a second life where he could continue in policy, which he did through something called the Nuclear Threat Initiative, serve on boards. He was intrigued by that, of course, on the Coca-Cola board and many others. And then a third supporting, started off with Georgia Tech. There's a school there, the Nunn School. And so he wanted to, in his late 50s, wanted to have basically a second career, and having had by any measure a successful career in terms of service to Georgia, the Senate, and America for 24 years.
This may be a question that's probably better posed to the senator, but were there any concerns about the institution change? You hear that Senator Chambliss, another of your old bosses.
I think that's true of Chambliss, and we can talk more about that.
Sure.
I'm sorry, I'm so wordy,
no,
but
you're talking to possibly the wordiest person on this campus. Don't worry about that.
I think that it was beginning to change in '96, maybe sooner through Clinton's first 4 years. Maybe '88 was the year that you look back and others like you look back and say, well, maybe that was the year that the changes, the current changed, time, tide, whatever. And Nunn was there, and we can talk about that. But the Washington of today, which I began to see when I went back up there in 7 with Saxby. It maybe was on the margins in terms of fundraising, in terms of partisanship, but the thing that you take away is from Nunn's service in the Senate was, I'll never forget, in 87 time frame, he and Barry Goldwater working together, Goldwater as chairman of Armed Services, Nunn as ranking member, to develop something called Goldwater-Nichols, which reorganized the Pentagon. So what? Well, Schwarzkopf says after first Gulf War, which Nunn voted against the resolution on a Saturday morning, I happened to be there, Schwarzkopf pointed to what they call Goldwater-Nichols, but in essence it was Goldwater-Nunn, I think, with all respect to then Representative Nichols, that what they did to reorganize the Pentagon allowed people like Schwarzkopf to have the responsibility and to implement on the ground, this is what we need to do, versus having this bureaucracy back in D.C. that Schwarzkopf was always looking over his shoulder, or his predecessors. So I remember looking in Nunn's office one day, and there was a quote on the vote tally, or a quote attributed to the vote tally on the passage of that reorganization, where Goldwater says, if we don't get, this is 87, if we don't get somebody good to run in 88, I'm voting for that guy. But that was Goldwater, maverick, all his life.
Right.
But the point here is that Mr. Republican said in 1987, I'm so impressed with you, my ranking member, that I'm going to say this. And then, of course, there's the Nunn and Lugar in terms of nuclear threat initiatives. Nunn and Name Someone, Pete Domenici, the fellow from Oregon, chairman of the Appropriations Committee, Hatfield, and David Boren, Lawton Childs, a Democrat, Boren a Democrat, but Domenici and Hatfield. I remember coming and having lunch, prayer luncheons, with Nunn in Nunn's office, with those people, chairman of Appropriations, Domenici, chairman of Budget, Boren, who was his friend later, president of Oklahoma University, and Childs, his dear friend from Florida, every week. Now, and by the time I got there, the senators from the different parties rarely sat down with each other for meetings and never had an informal lunch. And so it was Nunn's retirement. I didn't notice it at the time, but I can point back to you now and say, I watched the end of, and this is why I was so proud of Saxby, and I'm jumping here, but I was so proud of Saxby and Warner trying so hard to do something on the deficit during the 10-11 time period with Obama as president.
Yeah, I mean that's something I spoke to Senator Chambliss about. You know, these gang of 8,
it started out gang of 8, and
you whittle down a few members sometimes,
right.
maybe add some here or there, and I don't know if we're falling into necessarily a nostalgia trap that it was so much better, because there were fractious times back then too. But as you mentioned, it's hard to think of a contemporary comparison. Maybe Patty Murray, Lamar Alexander today. Maybe.
But there's no middle, and you can quote
or even
me,
Obama Lugar on nuclear proliferation.
There's no middle now.
Yeah.
I guess there are middles somewhere. I heard about a congressman from New York, a moderate Republican. Really, the Syracuse area. But in terms of the U.S. Senate today, there's only Corker and Flake. And guess what? They're retiring.
They're rushing to the door.
That's right. Collins, of course, Murkowski, McCain, but there is no, other than those people you can name on your hand, I am afraid there's no middle in the Senate. or the House for that matter.
Well, especially the House,
Right?
And we can talk about
Right.
that in a little bit when we.
But in 1996, there still was.
Right.
And clearly
Right.
in Nunn from 72 through 88, 90, one of Nunn's closest allies on the Armed Services Committee was John Warner. And just, closest friends, closest allies. And that's just, except for Saxby and Mark Warner, that's gone.
You weren't there by the time Senator Coverdell got to Washington, or maybe you overlapped briefly.
I was in Coverdell. Excuse me. No, that was 92.
Yeah. So
he beat Fowler.
Right.
By then, I left in August of 92.
Okay.
And went over to the chamber for 4 years. So that's correct. I vividly remember the Democratic primary, fall of would have been 91. Nunn sorting through, am I going to run? I'm not going to run. I vividly remember those days. Remember the primary, the New Hampshire piece.
How seriously did Senator Nunn weigh it?
I think serious is right. I think he looked at it. He talked to a lot of thought leaders and political leaders and a lot of friends in Georgia. So I think it was pretty serious, both in a little bit in 88, 87, 88. In fact, my friend Bobby Kahn at the Jefferson-Jackson Day dinner in 88, February of 88, had Nunn-type presidential placards.
Just in case.
Just in case. So I remember that in 88. But more serious and in the 91 time frame. But then, Clinton said, I'm going to do this. And for reasons that unknown to me, Nunn stepped aside.
So what drew you back to Georgia?
Something,
obviously the job offer.
The job offer, but our daughter then was, let me just quickly calculate, 80, 92. So she was 12. So we wanted to kind of be in one place for high school. And
I'm sure your daughter thanks you for that.
And then Georgia, and then so we wanted to raise her in Georgia, and then also begin to prepare to support her college tuition.
Right.
And because that was pre-hope, and so we moved back, and I did a great job with the chamber, opportunity at the chamber, and then after that, the really best non-government job I had was in government affairs for Blue Cross Blue Shield of Georgia.
Well, about the chamber first, the much vaunted business establishment in Georgia. But I think if you go back and look at the records, Georgia Chamber of Commerce was relatively small.
Yes, back when I was there, it was. I will say this: it was. It had gone through a transition, and I don't remember a number, but whatever the membership is today, I remember when I got there, it was 1,500 or 1,600 members, and it got all the way up to 1,700 before I got a chance to go with Blue Cross. And, it was not the 500, 600 pound gorilla that it is today. And it is no doubt a powerful organization. But we were going through a period of retrenching when I was there.
Why do you think that was? Do you think that when we hear business establishment, we think Coca-Cola, Delta, Georgia Power? Was it just simply that the power of those corporations just sort of were strong enough on their own that they didn't need necessarily
I think that's it. I think it's maybe several reasons. I think that's one. Although they did support the Georgia Chamber, but particularly at the time, the Atlanta Chamber was very strong. But I think also, and I'm on this is a hypothesis.
Sure. Those are allowed.
Based
Encouraged
on my opinion. There was an interesting dynamic. So I started with the chamber in August of '92. That 2 months later, Coverdale's elected, I believe. And we were in the last year of a good run of Republican presidents, Reagan, Bush. And so there may have been, to what we were sitting down here for today, is back to the subject, Charlie, is a heavily controlled Democratic Party in the governor's office in Georgia and the state general assembly, so all of government was Democrat.
Right.
As it was in 1970 when you say, well, why'd you start out as a Democrat, Charlie? Well, that was all there was. Like today, if you want to be an intern in D.C., unless you were in Sanford Bishop or John Lewis's district or Mr. Johnson's, you're a Republican. And in my case, I'm not even sure Newt was there. No, he wasn't in 1970. So, if you wanted to work for the Senate from Georgia in 1970, you were going to be a Democrat, Talmadge or Russell. So my point is, now fast forward very quickly, there was this beginning tension. Johnny had run a serious competitive campaign for '90 governorship. And then Coverdale was, when I came down here, was running a victorious campaign against Senator Fowler. And so you may have begun to see the business establishment finally saying, I'm supporting H.W. Bush, I supported Johnny, I'm supporting Coverdale. And so a tension between the Republican-based chamber and the political reality of those days.
So,
and that might have been a reason why, because now what you have is a supercharged chamber and a supercharged Republican majority in leadership, and it's all synergistic.
Right. You mentioned Johnny Isaacson, Northside Realty. That's sort of the fire sector of the economy. That's sort of the lifeblood of Atlanta Republicans. But you also had in the '90s Guy Milner, who three unsuccessful,
but very competitive.
Very competitive.
Very
campaign.
competitive. Right.
If not, had Governor Miller not been on the ticket in '94 and it had been somebody else,
we'd had
probably
Republican at the same time that Tennessee and Alabama were enjoying Republican, and South Carolina.
Right. So it seems like what you're saying is that the policy preferences of the chamber, its individual members, would have liked to support maybe what would have been considered Republican policies, but the political reality on the ground with a Governor Miller and a Senator Nunn, a Senator Cleland later.
Absolutely. I think that I've just thought of it, meeting with you today, thinking about coming here today in terms of the transition. I think that was a big part of that. And then Lindsey Thomas took my place in '97 when I left to go with Blue Cross. Although he was a Democratic congressman, and we still were late to the dance on a governor being elected, but he had quite frankly, it began to really grow in Lindsey's, and then George Israel, Republican mayor, a Republican leader from Macon, then it really took off, and then it was aligned. It was Sonny and George and the chamber, and it took off in the 2010 prospect, and then it's just continued. Great leadership now with Chris Clark. Great leadership.
So walk me through some of those major issues, those public affairs, political issues that you had to deal with as chamber president.
The flag.
Let's
talk about
the flag.
Well, I actually, and it's interesting, just as an aside, a footnote to me, I have always, in my career, even back to the savings and loan days, always believed it was important to have strong relationships based on integrity and like-minded philosophies. And my point there is that during my time with Nunn, I developed relationships and friendships with people in Zell's camp because of our just professional work. And so in sometime in the 94 time frame, whenever it began to, Zell said, well, we're going to change the flag. And of course, he ultimately failed.
Right.
And this might have been an issue that was a bridge too far for the chamber, but given some of the certain specific leadership at the chamber and Governor Miller and his staff, the chamber, Georgia Chamber, came out to change the flag under Zell.
Right.
And so we were a part of that failed campaign. And so that was a point in time where the Democratic governor wanted to do this, but for whatever reason, conservative business leadership and certainly conservative outstate leadership said, no, we're going too fast. So that was one issue where there was that was an important issue in Zell's in Zell's agenda. And the lottery, one other thing.
Sure.
The lottery, this was something, a dynamic within the chamber, was the big Atlanta businesses. I think for the most part, I don't want to say Coke was because I don't know Coca-Cola per se, but there was a sense the big Atlanta businesses understood the intersection of the need for better higher education and pre-K and kindergarten in Georgia, and were not as held back by the people for the 5 quick reasons were opposed to the lottery: gambling, and gambling. That
it's like I didn't know there was 5.
That we came out pretty strong for the lottery. In fact, I actually ghosted, but I signed an op-ed piece in the AJC at the time supporting the lottery.
How at the forefront of your mind, stepping back to the flag issue, were the Olympics?
Well, I can't remember. Let's see. When was Barnes elected? 98?
98.
Okay. So that was a big part of it. But with so many things, and the people who were more involved in the governor's office than I, because I was over at the chamber.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember it was kind of given to me or presented to me by Zell's staff. Well, it's time. This is the right thing to do historically. And this was 94, and there really wasn't a pressure from Billy Payne and others. It seems to me, from my own small perspective, you will know better by Googling, that was the pressure. Because when did we get the Olympics? Was it
96?
96. But
yeah.
when I don't know when it was announced. I don't recall Olympics
90 maybe?
and flag change being tied together.
It may have been 90.
But I don't recall.
I'd have to check.
I don't recall it.
What about transportation? That I mean, it seems that's always been an issue. But
yeah, it was big then. It was big. One thing going back to Russell and Talmadge, and certainly back in the day, Fletcher Thompson, and some of the in Georgia, we didn't have a lot of turnover, so you had people like a Phil Landrum and who rose to very high positions in the House Appropriations Committee, and you had Russell over here in the Senate, and a lot of, while it's inadequate today, a lot of the interstate system in Atlanta and outstate came from that team. So transportation always seemed to do pretty well. I remember the chamber, we worked on legislation to try to do something about the gulch and a multimodal system. But again, we were, I guess I'm coming up with the 3 or 4 reasons why I left the chamber. but we may have been a little ahead of its time in terms of trains and and MARTA was on board, but the concept of commuter trains still has not taken off.
Well, I mean, today's the first day of the legislative session for 2018, and the talk is that finally, either commuter rail or some sort of congestion. I guess when you were at the chamber, Atlanta congestion on the highways was really sort of.
It was getting there.
It was
but
really
we didn't
getting
have.
there.
It seems to me, and I don't want to be an opponent of, and certainly now it's so obvious as the back of our hand. But back then, and this is 92, 96. Yes, 400 was congested. Yes, the interstate, and so forth, the 285. But having recently today and yesterday driven in North Fulton and Gwinnett, you probably didn't have the density then that you've got now.
Right.
That's the
Right.
critical, the turn. It's the tipping point. We now have gone past the tipping point.
Yeah.
Whereas in the early to mid 90s, we really didn't have for commuter rail.
Right.
Because we talked about, as you may have studied, I know you studied, concept of something from Athens corridor down 316 at the time to Atlanta.
The brain
Gainesville.
train.
Yeah. And we didn't have the density we've got now.
Right. I mean, Gwinnett. I think Gwinnett's probably still, if not the fastest, maybe the second fastest
but we've
growing
got
county.
I mean, anyone you've witnessed it every day. You're whether it's morning or night, it's not passable.
Right. Yeah.
Siri doesn't even know how to tell you to get from Atlanta to Athens.
Google Maps it tries to get me to just turn around and reschedule if an interview's in Midtown. I just
Exactly.
I don't even schedule
I think
before 10 o'clock.
I think now, and I think people like the leadership, governor and others are acknowledging that we passed the tipping point.
Right.
In terms of transportation.
Right.
But back then it was early days.
Well, and let's see if you agree. The composition of the party leadership, although Speaker Ralston is not from Atlanta,
right.
He's one of those mountain Republicans.
Right.
Comes by it true and honestly.
That's right.
But you have finally a metropolitan leadership, whereas
that's right. Back then, we've got the World Congress Center. We've got so many things because of Speaker Murphy and his team. But it was still a very rural legislature, and that had a lot to do with commuter rail having a hard time, and on down.
Sure, and I mean, I guess it's not to minimize Bob Irvin, who was a Buckhead Republican, but he was still certainly outnumbered.
It was still he was I mean, the great story there of the history of two-party development in Georgia is Isaacson. When he was minority leader of the state house or state senate, there were he and 4 people, and Coverdale tells the same story.
Oh yeah.
And so it's a big change.
So you've already mentioned Blue Cross Blue Shield. You went out to the private sector again, back your banking days.
Right. Well, and and I think the buzzword term would be financial intermediary, and I have lived a charmed life. I remember telling or going. I think he's. I don't know if he's still alive. Dell Dunn, but if he may have just recently passed away. But kind of a predecessor to Bullock. I remember taking one of his courses in politics after I came back from my Washington time with Russell, and talking about the change over time. And one of the things I said to my then girlfriend, soon to be wife, was, I really hope that I can take my Russell experience and my combination of being in a financial intermediary, and so you can follow as I prefer, varied career. My wife says checkered, but if you follow my career, there's a thread there.
Right.
And Blue Cross, 96 to 2006, was a great experience, not only in terms of the business side, but affecting public policy in terms of health care. So it was my best private sector experience. My best government experience, of course, was Nunn, Saxby, and Zell, but been blessed to be in that realm in '90, and watched Sonny get elected in '02. So watched that final brick for Republicans being laid in '02.
Before I want to talk about your assessment of 2002, but very briefly in that 96-2006 was Senator Coverdell's sudden death.
And my friends, I won't air quote because they are my friends to this day. One of them is head of the Board of Regents, Steve Wrigley. One is a federal judge, Mark Cohen, and the other one is a successful investor, entrepreneur now, Keith Mason. They came together and said, well, it's either going to be us or Harman because we're going to go see Zell in a minute. And
you got outvoted.
And I wasn't in the room. so
they had a quorum.
They had a quorum. And Keith called me and said, Zell would like for you to go up and help get his office started. And, of course, it was a great honor, and have been an admirer of his, supporter of his ever since.
Now, how long? You weren't up there long.
Just 3 months.
Just to get
the interim period. I hired the staff, initial staff, literally got the office started. Tried to let Zell know about some of the norms and the cultures of schedule and calendar, and that there is no schedule. The point was, sir, there is no schedule or calendar to the Senate. There's no clock, and so when he got there, he immediately reached out to Phil Gramm.
Yep.
Getting back to kind of our discussion, and I believe if he may have been the only Democrat, but I know he was the first Democrat to endorse President Bush's tax cut in January of '01.
'01, yep.
He and it might even been called Graham Miller, but it was but he had known Phil Gramm when Gramm was coming through Georgia and teaching and so forth, and they developed an immediate friendship, and so that's Nunn reaching out to Republicans or Republicans reaching out to Nunn. Zell, frankly, continued that tradition by his first associations were with President Bush, who he had worked with as governor, and Senator Gramm. So that is I'm sure historians of Zell and students of Zell know that and have recorded that, but that's a specific incident in time where he continued that tradition of working across the aisle.
Well,
in 2001.
I think I've said this before on other interviews. My introduction to Georgia politics, like I said, I'm an Illinois native by way of Missouri, but I got back to my dorm room freshman year, turned on MSNBC during the Republican National Convention in 2004.
Yeah.
And here was this man with a shock of white hair challenging Chris Matthews.
That's right, to a duel.
Very heavy set Chris Matthews
to a duel.
And I just shook my head and I was just like, where is this man?
Who is this guy?
Who is this guy? Is he a senator from Georgia?
Yeah.
He's like a Democrat.
And Cheney later said that night, I think it was Cheney, said, I'm glad he's on my team.
It was certainly an eye-opening experience.
Yeah. But that was Zell.
Yeah. Oh, sure. And I think he probably, I think maybe Jim Galloway said, or by Bill Shipp, that he regretted the bombastic tone.
Yeah.
But he certainly was he had his convictions in 2004
by then
with the Republican Party
had
and the
major
Democratic
problems. I'll say concerns with the Democratic Party.
Well, yeah, the book,
National Party No More. So that's one thing about Zell. In fact, I think he was grateful. I said this, but one time I said, you remind me a lot of Winston Churchill, and because of the way you maneuvered your political career in a positive way, and part of that was. Actually, I really think he was always the same. Whether he was the lottery, changed the flag, and by the time he got to Washington, he was going to follow his true north, And if that meant the Democrats had changed or the Republicans had changed, he was always going to be Zell.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when he wrote that book.
Well,
about that time.
And unlike Churchill, Zell Miller never actually changed parties.
That's right.
So he actually.
That's right.
Well, and in terms of endorsements, in 2014, he's endorsed Senator Nunn's daughter, Michelle.
That's right. I'm probably in a distinct minority, but I would love to have a political bull session where my position would be that Zell never changed, but the world changed around him. But
who knows? Maybe we can put together something.
That's right.
We'll put together a round table.
That's right. That's right.
So you finally went back full time to Washington. Well, actually, 2002. You know, you're sitting in Atlanta in your offices.
Right.
And did you expect or anticipate that Governor Barnes was going to lose?
I thought he was going to win. I remember going literally with hat in hand to see Rusty Paul because I was vice president of government affairs for then and today a significant corporate citizen in Georgia. And I remember going hat in hand to Rusty Paul saying, "Rusty, what do I do?" Because I went to the last minute, to the last vote, had supported Roy.
There are worse people you could go hat in hand.
That's
too.
right. That's right. And what's interesting, and just a quick little note if you want to circle this, when Chambliss reached out to me in December of 2006, he looked at me and said, I know a lot of people consider you a Democrat, and but that he had talked to someone, a senior Republican supporter in Georgia, leader in the party and all that, and that person helped me get hired because he said, well, Harman may have come to the dance late, but once he got here, he stuck. So, and I think that's probably why, that's one of the reasons Saxby hired me, because he was able to tell Republicans that, well, this fellow's got the endorsement of some longtime Republican leaders, party leaders. So, but going back, yes, I was literally involved and watched that change, that moment in time when Sonny was elected.
What convinced you to leave again the private sector and go
with Saxby?
Back to Washington.
Well, in although it was only 3 months, it was 3 months that I'll never forget in terms of Zell.
A very busy 3 months.
But it was an interim period, get his office started, get his staff hired, and then, in fact, he sought it out first, and I certainly supported it. Promoted, I had hired him to be our legislative director for Zell, and when I left, after my short time, he promoted this gentleman to be his chief of staff, who had been with Coverdell. So it's interesting in terms of Democrat Zell Miller promoting a chief of staff to be his from Coverdell's office. So in terms of my transition, and then so I'm going along, doing well in healthcare world, corporate world. By now, the company I'm with is called WellPoint. It's a national healthcare company, and Saxby contacted me in December of 2006 and said, well, if you ever want to, get back into the game, I'm happen to be looking for someone. My chief of staff has left to go to the private sector, and I said, well, as a matter of fact, I'd like to get back on that side of the desk, if you will, and he moved very quickly, and I started a month later, January of 2007. And I was with him until, just for the record, August of 2013.
Maybe this is a weird question, but was it different working for a Republican as a Republican's chief of staff than it had been previously as a chief of staff AA for a conservative Georgia Democrat?
Right. I get that. Interestingly, I get that question a lot, and I think it goes. And I mentioned it a couple of moments ago. People's character has always been important to me that I have affiliated with, and all three of those. Certainly, Zell was, as we've talked about, was a much more fiery orator than either Saxby or Nunn.
Oh, absolutely.
But so let's talk more about 12 years with Nunn, almost 6.5, 7 years with Saxby. That's really the comparison. Mm-hmm. And so both high integrity, commitment to Georgia, both of them. I didn't get elected to come up here and be a show horse, to borrow a Busby phrase. Both were quiet leaders who wanted to get something done, and you can point to Saxby's leadership in agriculture. You can point to his leadership on armed services,
intelligence,
and then intelligence, and then, although ultimately unsuccessful, I do think he changed the conversation. He and Warner were part of changing the conversation at the time on the debt and deficit. It had exploded under Bush, W. Bush. It continued to explode under Obama. And that effort with he and Warner and two other Republicans and two other Democrats was, well, now it's unique. But the point is, to answer your question, there isn't much difference to me between Nunn and Saxby. Voting records may be different over time, but in terms of this connection would be Georgia senator, small town,
yep,
lawyer, low key, and high integrity, and so that was the same, and so that made it enabled me for it to be seamless.
I'm going to ask you to hypothesize again, but maybe your last comment just made me think about that. That what is it about Georgia or the Georgia electorate that seems to elect Zell Miller, notwithstanding, that style of politician? Because you think low key. When I think low key, I think Johnny Isakson.
Exactly. Right. Coverdell.
It doesn't seem
Russell.
The electorate
Right.
likes to elect or send to Washington some of the folks you see on
that's true.
The Sunday shows.
I think
and
that's
everything
true.
Like that.
I think it was true.
Governor Deal would be
Deal.
another example.
Exactly. Sonny, very workmanlike. So I think, but in terms of Washington, I think that Nunn, Isakson, Chambliss, and Coverdell are four exemplars of that notion. I think it's changing. I think this is not a judgment. This is just a fact. Perdue has taken to Trump. He's Johnny certainly supports Trump. This isn't about support or not support, but Perdue is much more visible,
right,
in that
and
regard. Vocal, and that's okay. But through the four examples we've talked about, including Russell, and I think Talmadge, although Talmadge had a little bit of the red suspender from his father,
he came by it honestly.
He came by it honestly. His time in the Senate, certainly the 60s, the 70s, oh my God, the Watergate Committee. He fit that mold of the Russell, Nunn, Coverdell, Johnny, Saxby mold. And why is that? Well, it's a great tradition. I don't know if that's a tradition that's ebbing as the future of politics becomes more tribal and more the way it is with no no incentive at all to work, together.
It would seem to definitely be a I mean,
so it could be that tradition that we, or at least I certainly look fondly back on, and you as an academic are aware of.
Sure.
Could well be ebbing.
Well, I guess that's a good segue into asking. We're now in a period of Republican dominance, a very brief period, maybe a decade, 12 years or so of competition. If you think about through the 90s and early 2000s.
Right.
What are the substantive differences between Georgia under Democratic control, some would say Democratic rule if we're talking Tom Murphy, and Republican control under the Republican General Assemblies, Republican governors?
Yeah.
Is it priorities? Is it sort of the path taken to achieve those priorities? What do you think it is?
It's a good question. I think, and we alluded to it earlier in terms of transportation, and the flag. It's really there are some issues today that we can point to in a moment if you'll help me remember. Mm-hmm. But if you think about, I think now. Certainly, the rhetoric is more sharp-edged, but it's geography. Now we have suburban Republicans in charge. Now, yes, Speaker Ralston is from Blue Ridge, mm-hmm. But really his district, which includes Gilmer County, is on the edge of exurban Georgia.
Right.
No doubt about it. And the Zell Miller Parkway and 575 and 985 that Zell happened.
Part of another long and good Georgia tradition.
That's right, is why so much of this growth. Mm-hmm. And so I would argue it's geography that as you pointed out, it's now run by exurban and suburban Republicans, and just a short time ago, certainly 70s, but 80s and 90s, run by semi-rural Democrats.
Right.
And so I think that change shift in the geographic demographics, mm-hmm. location, is probably the biggest change. Now, since 2002, you've had issues now that come up that I don't think, and now I'm just Charlie Harman opinion,
right.
Murphy would have ever let out of the bag. He would have never dealt with RFRA. It would have never come out of committee. And other issues similar to that. I don't know. Guns is a separate issue in terms.
Well, at least the campus.
But the campus piece,
right.
That kind of stuff, I don't think we would have seen under a Murphy rule. Mm-hmm. But now with Republicans, where issues like RFRA, like guns on campus, are such hot button issues, that's where you have the difference. And that goes back to Murphy's power, and the fact that people deferred to him. Mm-hmm. And in the Senate, I must say, you also had, while there was always, whether it was Pierre and Murphy or Zell and Murphy, there was the clashes in the Senate. But you had two very good leaders in the Senate in terms of Zell and Pierre and their committee chairs, and just wouldn't have let a RFRA issue be so divisive. And we can certainly follow that path in terms of looking at the future in terms of these hot button issues. But I think, long story short, not so much party, but how geography has shifted. And you can go right to healthcare and talk a lot about geography and healthcare. Today, it's not about the challenge of rural hospitals. That is a suburban, exurban, Republican, free market, laissez-faire view of healthcare versus a rural Republican, rural Democrat
right.
healthcare divide.
The reality on the ground is
of
those hospitals are
failing.
right.
And so the parties have changed, but the key, I think, for you and your students and those who study after you, researchers, is the geographic demography. That's how I would say it.
Well, I guess with transportation as well, if we look at the sort of the restructuring of the gasoline tax with the hotel tax.
The fight is totally exurban, suburban versus rural.
Right, and where you do see, I mean, there are some ideological splits between, you know, the sort of you know, anti-tax at all costs versus what's the old Chamber of Commerce sale? The Chamber of Commerce sale is saying that they never met a sales tax they didn't like.
That's right.
Kind of perspective.
Well, you have
on
that
things.
both nationally and in Georgia. You have now the just breakout in a rash tax issue.
Right.
Whereas the Democrats of the Roy Barnes, Busby, Joe Frank less so, but Busby and Barnes fully understood, and the lottery's a tax. Zell fully understood the importance of having a balanced budget, a strong bond, and rating, and to some extent, Nathan's leadership and Sonny's before that. For example, it's a tax subsidy, the policy in terms of film.
Right. I read somewhere more movies are started in Georgia now.
I know.
So we have to. Folks in Georgia have to be careful when they throw around the term Hollywood elites
That's
anymore
right.
because
that's right. But,
it's a large portion of the economy
now. To that
now.
point, that's another issue: guns, RFRA, and taxes. And so far, because of our sales tax, when the economy's doing well, like right now, we from here over to Atlanta, Georgia Tech. Oh my goodness. Y'all's construction here, Georgia Tech's growth, Emory's growth, and phenomenal. That corridor down the two interstates from, say, Lenox Square, down to the airport, just booming right now.
Right. What gets me to the question: why do you think Georgia Democrats were able to hold on to power so long in Georgia? Because as we mentioned,
great question. South
Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, Florida.
Yeah,
it went Republican far.
Exactly.
Far sooner than Georgia.
Mississippi, Texas,
even Mississippi and Alabama.
And I think it's because Atlanta was the heartbeat of a successful economy. So the economy, you didn't have the boom and bust that you had in other states, because Atlanta and Hartsfield, going back to my first remembrance, has been an economic engine that's never stopped.
Right.
And so good times, people like Busby, Joe Frank, Carl Sanders.
Oh, sure. Sure.
And throughout there, Murphy, and Pierre Howard, they were able to ride a pretty good economy, an unbelievable asset in the airport, and a commitment to public schools that our other southern states, not including Florida, but certainly South Carolina, Alabama, and Mississippi,
traditional deep South states,
did not follow, and so Zell with the hope certainly jump-started, but we didn't close our schools. We didn't have the problems at the university level and the public schools that Alabama and Mississippi had, and so you can go back there, and that was under Democrats, and so there was this begrudging. We didn't change over. The economy was always pretty good. We had tremendous growth with the World Congress Center and the stadiums and the Braves, and that's not in the Falcons, and that's not the throwaway line. Sports, even today, as you and I know better than anyone,
there's a big game. For posterity.
And
there's a big game tonight.
It's a big game, that just for the record.
Right.
The point being that that all those things came that we've just talked about during Democrat administrations and Democrat leadership. And so there was and then you had in the Senate, you had Talmadge Nunn, you had Mattingly, and some people, and this is just an opinion, might have said, well, that was an anomaly because of Talmadge's problems.
Sure.
But so you didn't have that farm team. Bob Bell was a great American, a great Georgian. Jay Morgan, certainly Johnny. But you had solid people. None. Why change horses? And so I think that's it. It's a tradition of Democrat leadership, plus this this flow, this positive flow of a positive economy.
Do you think Georgia, you and I both have thrown out the term Georgia Democrats because there used to be a distinction.
Right.
Does that distinction matter anymore?
It's gone. We're our number, and I think that's true of the nation.
Right.
It's now a very polarized nation. To use the term that my author, writer, hero, David Brooks says, it's very tribal. Mm-hmm. And it is what it is. So we reflect the nation. It's almost without, you talked about a democratic republic. Sometimes I think that we ought to, this is radical, become more parliamentarian and just have at it. Go for 4 to 6 years like UK or mm-hmm. whatever. And then if it's the wrong direction, then we change horses. But we're not there yet. But a lot of people, you're either with us or, it's very tribal. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, we are national Republicans and we're national Democrats for good or ill.
Why do you think the Democratic Party of Georgia, out of power, what is this, 2007? It's roughly 15 years.
Right.
Shut out completely since 2010 of statewide offices. Right. Why do you think the Democratic Party of Georgia has failed to mount any semblance of a comeback? Although there are some signs of life more recently.
Signs of life, and Michelle Nunn was competitive.
Sure. Jason Carter
was competitive till things started breaking.
Yeah.
I would say in October of that year. Again, the economy. We had a tough time, but everybody else did in 07, 08, 09.
It was less tough here than
less tough
a lot
here.
of places.
And again, it's leadership, and it's that you've studied this, but I grew up in it. What's the difference between Birmingham and Atlanta, the airport, and leadership? Ivan Allen, governors versus leadership over there. But the point is that. Now the Republicans are riding that tide, that what do you call it? That flow, current, the current, and so there's reluctance to change, and then that quickly jumps back to the fact that there's no middle ground, and the Democrats, in order to win the primary, they've got to go hard left, and the Republicans have to go hard right, but the hard right politics of the Republican Party lines up with a lot more with the business leadership mm-hmm. and this super strong chamber. So you've got all of that going for the Republicans versus the Democrats just on the outside looking in.
But on cultural issues, like you've already mentioned, you brought up RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act.
Or guns on campus.
Or guns on campus, or pick another hot button sort of social issue because of, the economy of Georgia is more global and interconnected with California, New York, other places than it used to be. Is that the division within the Republican Party as a governing party in Georgia? That sort of, it's to oversimplify sort of the chamber Republicans and then social, cultural, ideological mm-hmm. conservatives. Is that the dividing line?
That is it is a line. Mm-hmm. But I don't think it's a dividing line.
Okay.
I think that the people who come to Georgia, whether it's films, whether it's hopefully Amazon, but it's
Right.
NCR, it's the folks down in LaGrange, the Kia plant. They come because the overall alignment, it's not this with Republicans, because you've got the outliers over here of RFRA and guns on campus. But it's so good that that there's much more of an alignment and synergy versus there's no alignment and synergy with the business and civic leadership and the profits and the investment returns with the Georgia Democratic Party. Because it's not party philosophy and ideas. It's, are you with Hillary Clinton? Are you with Fox News? Are you with CNN? That's what it is. It's not, this discussion about philosophy and issues. It's a discussion of personalities. And if you're going to say, well, you know what, I'm not sure about guns over in Athens on campus, but if you're telling me to change that, I got to vote for Hillary or Stacey or
The
then
other
I'm not going to
Stacey.
do that. Then I'm not going to do that.
Which, I think a lot of people think that's a new development. But, in Georgia, that's really a throwback to, are you a Talmadge guy or
Sure.
are you an anti-Talmadge
Yeah.
guy? And the policies necessarily didn't really matter so much as the packaging or the branding. You mentioned, Stacey and the Democratic Party. Is that a party divided along racial lines, that it's just, or actually the Democratic Party of Georgia, is it just the minority party anymore?
I think it's a
Or is that
consortium.
the
It's a lot of groups without a unifying leader or theme.
Okay.
And having said that, let's come back, maybe not 4 years, but 6 years from now, and because there's no middle, and it's really a parliamentarian type situation, we could very easily have, if this is 1824, you could have a Democratic-controlled legislature and governor, because there'll just be more people. Will be bluer. We'll look a little purple. We'll look a lot like Virginia.
Okay, right. So,
But that's just because of migration and births, and not because of any change. It's just there's be more
the demographic change.
Yeah, it won't be because anyone's thought, well, I'm going to go over there because of political philosophy. It's because of just numbers.
Do you think that
Malthus.
Right.
Malthusian.
Right. The arithmetic growth
Right, that's
versus
right.
geometric
Right.
growth. You obviously with Fulton, DeKalb, Cobb County,
Gwinnett.
especially Gwinnett, trending purple. Obviously Fulton and DeKalb are blue. As
Right.
Henry County,
Right.
trending. Looking like Northern Virginia, Fairfax, Loudoun County, places like that. Do you think that without a unifying figure or leader, absent one of the Stacys becoming elected governor, is it enough to have that sort of anti-Trump sentiment be the unifying factor for the Democrats in Georgia?
Going out on a limb, not enough to turn Georgia purple or elects one of the Stacys, or even my good friend John Barrow in this coming fall. But let's revisit this in 22.
Sure.
And certainly by 24, when there is, I guess there'll be the next open seat for governor, whenever that is. So that's 26. So 24, 26, for the Republicans to stay in control, assuming they win this fall, they're going to have to think about keeping some of whatever the hot button issue is in 23 and 22, keeping that bottled up, because we will be purple by then.
Do you think that demographics are the main threat to the Republican majority in the state?
Yes, I do. I think that stances on DACA, the program for young happen to be mostly Hispanics,
Right.
Who come here with their parents.
The
They didn't have a vote of where we were
right.
going to live 10, 15, 20 years ago. That will be such a wedge issue that could be one of the issues if they don't figure this out in Congress. That could be a hot button issue that turns the tide, helps turn the tide. Demographics being destiny, but help be an issue that would turn the tide. So wait a minute. I'm a millennial. I came here with the Amazon, hopefully, location.
If we say it enough, it might happen.
and certainly the social issue.
Yeah.
Clearly, it seems to me, just my opinion, that the RFRA issue, to some extent, guns on campus, and will be a telling issue in where Amazon goes.
Mm-hmm. So we've already mentioned, President Trump, but and going back to the issue of does political philosophy matter anymore? What do you think the effect of a Trump presidency? We've already been through 1 year, almost. What effect do you think it's going to have on the Republican Party? I'm thinking of issues, obviously immigration, you've already touched on that, but trade, free trade, sort of the retrenchment towards an economic nationalism, and on the worst end of it, sort of a hints or whiffs of sort of an ethno-nationalism. Where do you think the Republican Party goes from there? Does the Georgia Republican Party follow that lead, or does it reap the negatives without gaining any positives from it?
Good question.
It's a lot of moving parts.
I agree, but I think if the tax bill had not passed in Congress,
right.
I think that seems to me, there's the rhetoric, there's the tweets, and not going to deal with that. But John Kelly coming on board last summer, getting the tax bill passed, I think is something they can all point to and not have to deal with the personality, we'll say, but can deal with a substantive win that will keep again, and I've said this, I've mentioned the economy in several instances, but will keep the economy moving forward for at least the next 4 to 6 years. So I think that comes back then to Georgia, and and again, it bolsters, it delays the inevitable 2024 turn, because so I do not minimize the importance of the tax bill's passage. So I think that helps Republicans in Georgia. They can point to that as a substantive win, and truthfully, also, there are things. If you're a Republican, you've got indigestion about trade and international trade, but there's alignment with less regulation. Even in the back of your mind, for Republicans, do you really need all that land to be under federal control out west? And then the judges, and now the tax bill. So they can stand with Trump, and because make no mistake, you've seen the same polls. I've heard about the same polls.
Sure.
Republican voters in Georgia, he's got over 90% approval rating. Johnny's at like 80, Perdue's at 81, 82, whatever, both there at 80. Nathan's at 82, 84, Trump's at 90. Among Georgia Republican primary voters. So
what gives, Charlie?
So I think there's an alignment. Again, the business leadership in Georgia, the people who brought Kia here, who got the film people here, they, if you've got 10 issues, RFRA and guns on campus, the other 8, there's total alignment. And so they accept having,
Do you think there may be some aspect of a class or a geographical difference in that level of support that Donald Trump is able to pull in maybe some of those working class whites, rural whites that are maybe put off by, the rich folks over in Atlanta or something
There's
like
a lot
that.
of that, and it's here in Georgia. One of the nice things I've been able to do literally since February the 1st of 1980 is travel the back roads of Georgia. Make no mistake, this is Trump country outside of the metro areas and maybe even in the smaller towns. One thing that I think commentators and to some extent Democratic leaders misread is the successful, affluent Republicans in Cobb, and I think the race, the 6th district race, proves it. There are a lot of Trump supporters, a lot more than people want to kind of acknowledge in Cobb, and there's certainly, without a doubt, across what you and I know is exurban, rural Georgia, big Trump country.
Right.
And so farmers, and it goes back to this fascinating comment or thought that his policies are hurting Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, didn't get them in order, and Wisconsin, and rural Georgia. His trade policies in terms of agriculture trade and manufacturing trade are sure not right for West Virginia, but the people are supporting him at the 90% level because of all the other things that he stands for that they agree with. So it's an anomaly. I don't have an answer for you, but in Georgia, the political and economic interests are, except for one or two issues, which they accept, are completely aligned with Trump.
Well, I suppose
that's just Charlie Harman.
No. That was not sort of I was trying to think of where to go from there, but do you think how much of his you've mentioned that the policies, the political philosophies may not align, especially on a state that is as reliant on free trade as Georgia is with the ports in Savannah and Brunswick.
A lot of our pecans, I don't know if it's a majority, are shipped to China.
Right, right. I have a very good friend who works for it's not Ralston Purina anymore, but Purina. Yeah. He's in China, 6-8 times a year for dairy cows and things like that. We've talked about tribalism, sort of breaking down into that sort of those camps. Is it mainly, apart from Ashton, Ellett, and Charlie Harman, who live and breathe politics, it's most of the public just observes very briefly before elections, and it's mainly tone, feeling, gut reaction of, I agree with that guy, I don't like those folks, or I like those guys, I like his attitude, I don't like that person. Like, I love Trump, I don't like Hillary.
Right.
That sort of thing. Have we gotten to a place where it's mainly personalities?
Yes, and going back,
or party labels, I guess.
It wasn't so divisive 20, 30, 40 years ago as you and I talked about Talmadge or non-Talmadge. But I think that you've hit on it. It is personalities, and basically, I think Trump wins because 35% of his base, 35% of his vote, and more of that in terms of Republicans, but 35% of his people are never going to leave him.
Obviously.
Period. Even if he shoots somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue, as he said, they're never going to leave him. And then you've got the other 7%, and I think it's going to happen. We can bet a beer on this. I think it's going to happen again in 20. Is that the 35% will come back out with a vengeance, and he will get another 7 or 8% to get up to 42, 43, and he'll win again because I don't think the Democrats, because of their primary and their challenges, can mount somebody that can that can get to 42, 45% of the public, because you've got the 7 to 10% on top of the 35 who want Gorsuch, who want lower taxes, who want less regulation. And, maybe because having been in Washington for some period of time with different people, well know, even back in the day, even the Democrats were anti-federal government out in the West. I mean, they weren't anti, but they were suspicious.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now it's all red, and there's just too much federal land. So,
but then again, Nevada, Colorado, I remember those were Bush red states, and they've been reliably blue since.
I think we can attribute Nevada, and again, this is a rabbit hole we're going down, and so please pull me back. But having been up there when Reed first got there, when I was with Nunn, that's almost a Talmadge-like dynasty out there in Nevada, and in Colorado, I happen to know a little bit about Colorado. My son-in-law's family lives out there.
Okay. And
so you've certainly got Boulder, but you've also got exurban Denver, and then plus the cowboy ethos. So it's a swing state, I think. You got Cory Gardner.
Yeah, I think Gardner's
and a Democrat,
Michael Bennet.
Yeah, so that's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, and that Cory Gardner was able to beat. Was it Mark Udall?
Yeah,
it was.
Yeah,
it's one of the Udall boys.
Yeah, the incumbent.
Right. Says something, but I think Cory Gardner might be one of those people that we could probably shift towards the center of the Republican Party.
Absolutely. To the extent that there's a center in the Republican Party, it's still pretty far right. It's certainly not Jacob Javits and Charles Goodall, but it's Goodell. But it's they're there. Well, you've still got Senator Collins, Murkowski. But those are the exceptions.
You're right. It's what's the old joke? The Rockefeller wing of the party's been under renovation since 1979.
That's right.
Of course, then there's the rumblings that Mitt Romney will be.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and that's
speaking of the old establishment.
Yeah, and that's probably the right state for that.
Sure.
The Trump phenomenon probably is not as great there as it is in the typical Western states.
Well, I guess last but certainly not least, who do you like in the game tonight?
I'm saying it again.
Who do you like in the game tonight?
Well, that's certainly not least. I'm my heart's with the hometown team, literally.
Right.
For where we're sitting right now, and it's been a great year. But Saban's it'll be an upset, but I'm pulling for the dogs.
Right.
But my head says don't bet a lot of money.
Right. Well, not that I was checking, but the line is sitting at 4.5 points for Alabama, which.
Well, that's about right.
Yeah.
That's about right. But it'll be, just to take a moment to talk about what's important.
Sure.
What a thrilling Rose Bowl.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, every emotion you can have in a football game, we Bulldogs experienced.
Well, I will admit freely that by the second quarter I was in the bedroom folding clothes while my wife was watching the game.
Well, good for your wife. I thought we'd met our match, and then I think it's a tribute certainly to the players, and this has been well hashed out over the last week, but. A couple of people said, including Kirby, the players, the commentators, well, what did you do? What schemes did you change? We played harder.
Right.
And so anyway.
Well, I think it helps that you have a great senior class, and Roquan Smith is a junior, not a senior, but. Yeah. The willingness of Chubb, Michelle,
without a doubt,
Lorenzo Carter, Davin Bellamy, all those guys to graduate, get their degrees, risk injury.
Yep.
Because
100%.
this is a business.
Chubb went down as you were.
Oh, yes.
And so quickly
Neyland
we'll end with
Stadium,
this. As Saxby said, who is one of my heroes, and certainly Nunn, but he said, I think Charlie was the last Rick fan in Georgia, other than his wife. And to that extent, all those guys were recruited by Rick.
Right.
So,
well, you could probably have my wife could give you a run for your money for being a Mark Richt
the last
fan.
Rick fan.
She's I see she'll root for Georgia and then turn on the Miami game. Just in case.
She and I would get along.
Right.
Well, thank you.
Thank
anything
you very
else?
much. No, I think we've hit on everything. And
I won't get into personalities
again,
or individuals, but I will say I think we're still a Republican state.
Right.
And I think that we will be, because of demographics. Don't see a lot of change. Maybe Barrow, but I don't see that. And so 18 is our controlled. 20, they maybe pick off some seats, probably not in Congress. And then 22.
Of course, you have realignment in between 20 and
22. And that goes, exactly.
Reapportionment, not realignment. Excuse me. Reapportionment.
22 probably stays the same, but 24 and 26, I don't know if either of us will be here in this state, but that's when I think it changes.
Right. Well, Charlie, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's so good. I'm glad you're here.